Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode in Wolfram Language Design, our incremental language design meeting. We have a variety of topics for today. First one is general operator forms. I don't exactly know what this means.
So this was partially inspired by a discussion that we had with Arnoud and a handful of other people about he had proposed this function called random selection, which is basically an operator form of random sample because the 1arg form is already taken. And in looking through function repository submissions and other things people have proposed, there's a whole class of things that are basically operator forms of existing functions that can't work within the existing design of those functions because whatever the operator form would be has already been taken.
And what's wrong with operator applied?
So operator applied is obviously the first option. You know, that operator applied works for any of these. Some of them are very popular. So we looked at the second item on there we looked at a couple of weeks ago, same as Q, which we've talked about using the greenlit version of that is same as. I think there is a discussion to be had about, you know, what the threshold is of something that's useful to have a dedicated operator form or to have a natural language or in a system implemented version of the operator. I think operator applied works for things that are relatively straightforward, but things like set2, we don't really, I mean, I guess you could use operator applied for that.
What is set2?
So it's the third item on the list there. It's basically the operator version of set. So this list of 6 functions here are all relatively popular on the function repository. They're all ones that we would consider looking at, but the question is, do we just want to say, these are all things that could be done in operator applied, and so they're not worth looking at?
Well, they could be done as x equals blah, x equals hash ampersand.
Yeah. Right. You could obviously make a pure function version of each of these.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Each of these have interesting use cases, and most of them are stymied from terse is just a operator form of short for an n number of lines. A lot of them get a little cheeky because they're trying to use a synonym for the existing function, and I don't like having 2 functions that are synonyms just because we want an operator version.
We already have a big problem with random choice versus sample.
Right.
So that makes it even worse if we try to add operator forms for one or both and change the naming.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one possible approach would be that there is a modification to names that is routine, that means it's the operator form of that function.
Right. Yeah. So we have
like append and append to, which isn't quite operator form, but that's the mutable version of
the thing. Equal to same at. Yeah. So that's kind of the last point I had in the agenda on this subject was, do we want to have a general naming paradigm that makes these operator forms sensible? We've been doing it on kind of a case-by-case basis, and since it's come up relatively frequently, especially in WFR functions, I wanted to have a general roadmap for how we look at that. Obviously, not very popular things or one-off things, operator applied or curry applied would be the way to go. But
okay, so which ones here are seriously common? I mean,
something important here. Something important here is that operator applied cannot handle attributes or holding attributes. Something like set2 probably needs to have its own operator.
By the way, we got a bunch of background noise from Daniel.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Actually, how do attributes work with resource functions though? Because aren't resource functions also some kind of sub-value internally?
That's a good point. I don't know. Does somebody know here? Ian, Danny?
No, I was going to ask, do they work the same way as pure functions?
I don't know offhand.
Do they work, period?
I thought they were rigged to work. Operative term being rigged.
I think that they may work by the head evaluates to a contextified function, which then can have attributes.
I see.
That sounds plausible.
Well, actually, I'm looking. I mean, I'm not sure. Like I'm just looking at the full form, and yeah, it doesn't look like it evaluates. So I don't know how it works, but it does appear to work.
Okay. Well, so then the question is, could operator applied have like function? Could we cut the background noise? Okay. Could operator applied like function take attributes in itself to be able to deal with that?
Well, maybe the thing to do, I mean, maybe it would make sense to have it inherit the attributes, but it would have to inherit them in some pretty bizarre way.
Okay. Who knows about operator applied here?
I do. I wrote that function.
Okay.
I was thinking about it. So because operator applied is supposed to work with any combination of brackets, I find it difficult. So because it has to carry. So if it's a function with 7 arguments, having a hold attribute on the rest could be complicated.
Let's at least have a think about it. But okay, but let's take a look at these ones here. How many serious operator forms are there? I mean, in other words, the
do you mean special symbols that are only operator forms, or do you mean operator forms, period?
No, sorry, I asked the question badly. What I'm asking is functions that we might imagine should have an operator form. I mean, I'm not convinced about this one, this terse one. That seems somewhat obscure.
Yeah, that's probably the most obscure of them.
Okay, what is same as?
So same as is an operator form of same Q. We looked at that one last week or the week before and said that probably makes sense. We weren't sure about the inverse version of unsame as or unsame. I started looking at an implementation of it and wanted to make sure we had the name right, and that if we were looking at other things like this, that we're using a common design for the operator.
Well, I think what we've got here is a preposition, equal to, same as. If basically the construct is thing preposition, that might give us enough freedom, might give us enough uniformity to be able to, for people to know what's going on, but enough freedom that we're not going to get stupid names.
Right.
Except that we already do have things like append to and associate to and stuff like that.
Yeah, which already confused me with this equal to thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, also there are some questions like, for example, the same as Q. Arguably, I mean, the issue is we have two different suffixes. So arguably it should actually be same Q as, except I think having the Q in the middle looks really ugly.
Right, which is why we talked about just dropping the Q, but it's...
Well, wait a minute. What is equal to? Equal to is an operator form of equal.
Correct.
But it is frustrating that append to is a mutable form of append.
Right.
Where append also has an operator form, but it's just called append.
Right.
I mean, I would kind of argue that, yeah, I think given that we have operator applied, it seems like we should kind of have a relatively high bar for when things should get their own operator form symbol, because otherwise it's sort of like, for every argument of every symbol, we can have an operator form.
Okay, here's a question, which Andrew on our live stream is commenting on this. Okay, so who's basically suggesting an infix form of operator applied. So let's consider that possibility, because I mean, if we did have something like that, how would that work?
Is this infix for inside of a composition or what?
Well, I suppose, but the issue is that we need both a postfix and a prefix form of it, because what we want
What if you're mapping this operator form? What if I'm mapping same as Q of 2 over a big list
all this
to get a list of
background
Booleans?
Right. How would that work? I mean, in other words, okay. I mean, probably it is too obscure to imagine some kind of tight binding operator form. Okay, so let's imagine that we could do this. Let's imagine that we had a some weird notation, which I'm not thrilled that it's a weird notation, but let's imagine it was a weird notation, exclam at sign, whatever. That means that is the equivalent to operator applied of same Q. Well, now we have to have a curry form, right? Here, if I'm not mistaken. It also reveals how much I have not used operator applied in a serious way. Yeah. So this would be, I mean, in the case of your short example up above, this would be, something like this, which then would become, in other words, if there was a short form of operator applied, is there any serious possibility of that? Comments. Everybody's on mute because I've been complaining about noise.
This has been suggested. Yeah. I'm looking for a suggestion that I'm going to put in the chat. So this is a bullet notation. And then you can, it's a bit like hash, but without the need of the ampersand. And this is implemented with curry.
Wow. That's a bit wild.
It's kind of amazing that works, but at the same time, I mean, couldn't you just write hash and then an ampersand at the end, pretty much?
Yeah. I mean, there's a possibility for some precedence issues, but it's not clear why this, I mean, it has a certain clarity to it, but then so does the hash thing.
I think it's the idea.
Although the bullet has to be, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. This was created to simplify the query language of DataSet.
So it doesn't involve ampersands, or right. or is it a precedence issue?
I think it's just to avoid the use of ampersand. So it feels closer to operator forms.
So another detail or another difference with it in hash is that you can't use the bullet more than one level deep. Is that right?
I think so.
Boy, that's interesting. I mean, pure functions are a very common construct, and having yet another notation for them doesn't seem completely crazy. It's confusing, though. I mean, see, this is, I mean, I wonder if there could be a name here for this. Because I think it would be a little less, I mean, this is getting into the distinctly obscure category. And another thing that is some exotic character here is going to be hard to type. What will be a name for the thing to go here? if we named the thing that went here, what the heck could it be? It's got to be some preposition-like thing. I mean, I'm just going to type a word, which isn't a very good word. If we had a word like that, I'm thinking of sort of, this is a very bad word as well, but that's kind of the idea.
So is this supposed to solve the problem of operator forms, or is this doing something else?
It's supposed to solve the problem of operator forms. It's something that is lightweight enough that instead of having a member queue with or something operator form, well, member queue already has an operator form that's useful. Oh my gosh, this is to deal with functions.
You can have exactly one bullet, so that's like omitting one argument, whereas operator forms are usually like giving one of the arguments and the others can be filled, which I guess is not different in the case of like exactly two arguments.
Right. Well, but I mean, this is.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, I think this is a way of having a simpler notation for carry applied in the most frequent case, but it's far from the power that carry applied or operator applied has.
Yes, of course.
Can we actually see, just out of curiosity, if you run it without the of A, like if you just run member queue of ABC bullet, what does that evaluate to?
Okay. What is all these ones doing? What happens if I have more than 6? What is that? What is that doing?
So wait, where does C
evaluated
go?
to a list of ones?
I think you have C defined. It's in black.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, maybe C is that list of ones. Yeah, that's what's
Apparently
happening.
it is.
There we go.
Okay. I wonder, I mean, syntactically, I don't know how this would work, but I wonder something like hash dot. It's very obscure. Means,
I mean, this is basically just an automatic way of putting the ampersand one level higher than the hash.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Is this because query looks at the head of the expression, so having it be a pure function interferes with that?
Oh, if that's true, it's just crazy.
No, you can have pure functions, just that the order in which the pure functions are always descending or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just because of some hackery in query, which should be fixed. That's not a real thing. That's because of hackery there. The real question is it a syntactic convenience? You know, for example, I routinely use this form of function occasionally. You know, occasionally that's super nice and super useful. And, you know, it's such a common construct. I do wonder whether having this form where there's a single argument that you can, you know, if we could get a nice version of this, it might be a good thing to have.
Well, maybe another question is, does this solve a precedence problem? Because, well, I mean, really, it seems like
yes,
it's the same character count. If you're writing hash dot, it's the same character count as putting an ampersand at the end.
Right.
The only benefit would be if it fixes a precedence thing.
It does. It fixes the precedence on the right-hand side of an arrow. You could routinely put a one argument function on the right-hand side of an arrow without any problem with the ampersand. On the other
But it
hand,
would be so confusing because you wouldn't. Well, I guess you would know that the hash dot doesn't go with the arrow because the arrow. But what if you have a hash dot inside of an ampersand as a pure function returning another pure function? That would be super confusing.
well, this is the same issue as with pronouns in English. I mean, the hash is a pronoun basically, and with pronouns in English, and even number and gender agreement is now no longer. And so, that halves the number of pronouns. I mean, in other words, pronouns are a hack where you have to have, the cat chased the mouse and it ran fast. You're out of luck there.
Maybe we should do like in Latin, right? They have two. They have like, hawk and illa or whatever. I mean, it's just you can arbitrarily kind of pick, so you can have two generic pronouns running around. But I feel like
how does Latin decide which one it refers to?
Well, I think one of them kind of means this and one of them kind of means that, and there's a third one that means something slightly weirder. But like they kind of just in actual sentences, they'll often like one person or thing will be assigned to this and another person or thing will be assigned to that.
But how do you know which one is assigned to which?
I don't remember. I think it's just that they'll I don't know. It's from some weird context.
Well, I mean, there are many in natural language. There are, big red dog, red big dog, that there are all these weird conventions which seem natural to people.
But I mean, I'm thinking that this is a little bit similar to that, where it's we already have one pronoun for the hash, and we're adding another pronoun, but I feel like it's sort of basically just adding a totally separate, independent mechanism for having pure functions. Just so that you can have two mechanisms so that they can interact with each other seems kind of bizarre.
Well, I mean, we have mechanisms like this mechanism here is equivalent. By the way, Christopher, I'm pretty sure you are the cause of all sorts of weird elephant-like background noise.
I guess my floor is squeaky as I pace around, but yeah, okay.
Anyway, but so we have this and we have this, and those are obviously equivalent. And look, it is clear that from the point of view of writing code simply, having a pronoun that you can stick in here that means a single hash is clearly worthwhile.
But is that not single hash?
Well, except that then you have to have an ampersand, and then as we point out, there's precedence issues.
Right, but I mean, it's just, I don't know. I just think it seems like introducing another totally parallel and pretty much totally equivalent mechanism for having pure functions, but that's like totally separate and different, just so that
that seems crazy.
Have two levels of pure function seems kind of crazy.
Except that languages have a whole collection of hacks for dealing. I mean, like look, there are plenty of languages, English not being one, where nouns are randomly assigned genders, thereby doubling the number of pronoun reference that you can have randomly. It's just a total heuristic. Like, anybody speak a language? I don't know. We definitely got Spanish speakers here. Is there a how does it work there? Is it? I don't know whether it has.
You mean whether pronouns follow gender?
Well, no. The question is, in English, we've got he, she in it. Mm-hmm. Okay, but most things in the world, other than people, and with a few minor exceptions, everything out in the world is an it. But in French, for example, it's a random assignment of some things that are some things can be referred to by a masculine pronoun, some by a feminine pronoun. And same in Latin.
Right, same in Spanish, yes, we have it both. And you need to know randomly every single noun, whether it's feminine or masculine.
Right, but you see what that's doing is that just doubled that meant that the hash sign, so to speak, that there are two different hash sign things that are pulling out, reference in sentences. In other words, by having two genders, you are doubling, you're halving the number of times that you have to go beyond a pronoun.
You just mean if you have a sentence, with two objects in it, there's a decent chance that one of them will be masculine and one of them will be feminine, and you can use different pronouns.
Right. Yeah. So, the cat chased the mouse and it ran fast. In English, we're toast there. We've only got one pronoun to refer to. But if we said the cat, I don't know, let's say the cat was called James or something, and it was a masculine cat, then as soon as we say the cat ran, James the cat ran fast chasing the mouse. No, I'm sorry. James the cat chased the mouse and he ran fast. We know how that referent works, if I'm making sense. And there's a direct analogy here, because we need to be able to refer to, we've got, how does this exactly work? We have, right, so our pure function is like a verb. How does this work? Yes, it ran fast is like a pure function. Ran is like the function, and the it is like the hash, which is grabbing an argument of that. That makes sense. And the issue is, which is a little bit different, but slightly but related to this, is, well, I mean, in that case, gosh, we've got, oh my, you see,
maybe we could have something, a similar thing would be if you could have, this syntax doesn't work, but you could have something where instead of writing just ampersand, you could write ampersand 2, and then that will assign hash 2. And then if you write ampersand 3, that'll assign hash 3. And then that way, you can sort of have nested ones, and you specify when you write the ampersand, whether you're binding to this or that. And then, that doesn't actually work, but.
Well, okay, so like a different mechanism.
That's a bit like the De Bruijn indices.
Yes, it is. It is like De Bruijn indices. I mean, so for example, we could imagine something where this sorry. I was thinking of something where I don't quite know how this works, where the thing being grabbed somehow is indicated. It's kind of like an eat.
You need to differentiate the ampersands as well, right?
Yes, you do.
So I'm not sure it's helpful, and we've kind of moved on, but I was going to mention in terms of linguistic ways of handling pronouns, Japanese is kind of interesting because there effectively are no pronouns. All pronoun references are used, like they're literally the same as nouns. So if you were saying the cat went over there, it ate its food, the literal way you'd say it is the cat went over there, cat ate food. Like you repeat the noun. There's nouns you can reference yourself or to reference someone who is masculine or feminine, but you also typically in conversation will reference someone even if you're talking to them by their name.
I see.
So there's effectively an infinite pronoun space because you can use any noun as a pronoun and there's no special pronouns.
But the assumption there is that if cat is repeated in the sentence, it means the same cat was referred to as the subject in the sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about if the noun is long? Like if you say something like the guy in the red shirt, did this, then would you later say like the guy.
Or you could say the guy or he. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if it's the guy in the red shirt and the guy in the blue shirt, the guy in the red shirt, outran the guy in the red shirt, but whatever, blue shirt, whatever it is. how would you then back reference those things?
So, I mean, it depends on level of formality and conversation, but you could contextually just reference red shirt or
I see.
Or red shirt person or blue shirt person. In more formal speech, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, fine. I understand. So that's okay, so you bake up a temporary noun, basically, a temporary okay. Look, it could very well be.
That's also known as function with the arrow, where you pick a name, basically.
Yes, you pick a
name.
Arguments. Right. I mean, the issue is a pronoun is a nameless noun, basically. And okay, it could be that our precedence problem with ampersands will be largely fixed by this user assistant stuff that's coming in with auto paren indications. But let's come back to our original question. The original question was, do we want a bunch of new operator forms for these various functions where the operator forms are popular, or do we want to find a better general solution to this? And one general solution would be a decorator for functions. So operator applied is a decorator for functions, but it is very long. And one possibility is a syntactic form for operator applied, which might be too obscure. That's okay. So what are our possibilities? So one is syntactic. What one is, okay, so these are our possibilities. So one is new operator form functions for popular cases. Another is more succinct version for more succinct input for operator applied. Another possibility is new syntax for single hash ... ampersand. I do think that last one would be quite interesting. If we could do it without it being just utterly, if we could do it without people getting utterly confused, because, for example, it wouldn't work, presumably, and it depends very much on the name. If you said something like this, or that, whatever a hash dot is, that wouldn't work, would it? Or would it work? Or would it lexically scan?
Well, the bullet there is implemented via an value. So
well, I understand the bullet is, but
right. it can't really lexically scan because it doesn't know how far out to go. Right, like imagine putting at the end of that list, right, open bracket X, close bracket, and then at the end of the member queue, right, open bracket Y, close bracket, which one is the one you're using? I mean, that's why you need to write an ampersand.
Right, so the only way it can work, new syntax for single blah, single for single level argument insertion.
But as you say, I think it's often, like in that member queue example, I think it would be very intuitive to write what you just wrote, not realizing that it's actually a level deeper.
Right, but for example, we have not had a lot of confusion with nothing. I mean, people know that nothing is only at that top level of a list. So my question is, could there be something which says, let's say ABC, Phil here, bad name. But is there some name that we can imagine for that? That would make it fairly obvious that it's a top level only.
Well, there's some slightly crazy ideas, like there's always the no argument slot.
That's crazy. because it's too close to things that will be used. I agree, no argument slot is something we certainly haven't used, but I think that's crazy. I mean, or worse than that, even the even more crazy. A naked slot. I think it's crazy. Because what we want to indicate is that it will be filled into here.
I don't think we could do it, but I was thinking of the placeholder.
Yes, the placeholder is a nice thing. I don't think that would probably, that as such isn't going to work, but something where, I mean, I've always wanted a thing where we could use placeholder as a pure function. I don't know how crazy that really is, because I don't think anybody.
I think there's some user interface things, like if you generate a new grid
palette
or table. Yeah.
The thing that looks like that would be quite lovely. I mean, of course, slot was partly picked because that character, you know, I've always thought we should render slot as something which looks like this with little tentacles on it.
So, okay, maybe just going up a level. I mean, what is okay, again, this is only one character away from how you'd already write it for pure functions. I think part of the reason we're talking about this is because there's some sense in which writing a pure function like that is kind of like, quotes, messy. But I don't know why, you know, I don't know why exactly it looks messy, and then why this would be, I mean, like, it does look messy and this does look cleaner, but conceptually, I don't think they're any different.
One way to make it look less messy is to do something I wanted to do for like 30 years, which is to have, maybe it already has been done, that Octothorpe, as it's officially called, has, I mean, it, you know, how much like a box does it look? Because it's still not looking like a box. It's still looking very firmly like an Octothorpe, as opposed to just a box with little, you know, knobs on it.
Is that why it's a hash? Is because it wants to look like an opening, like a slot?
Yes, I mean that was, well, it was, yes, that was kind of the that was that momentary thought back, you know, 35 years ago or something. Yes. I mean, we didn't really have the idea back then of sort of deeply typesetting, you know, typesetting in the ASCII, so to speak, which obviously developed later. But I mean, that right there, if we re-rendered this, if we rendered this character so that it looked more like this, which is certainly within our, you know, we're allowed to do that, so to speak, I think that would help.
Well, another thing is, I mean, I think one of the things we've been doing recently, which has been good, has been that we've had ASCIIization or ASCII'd forms of a lot of stuff, like the function arrow, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess we still have the ASCIIized form. It's just hash, but
yeah, it is right. That's exactly right. But it just appears, it isn't even a different character. It's the same character. It's just a rendering question in the code font.
Although it's not quite, because if you have a string and in the middle of the string you have one of these, we don't want it to render in some weird way.
Well, fair enough, fair enough. So what that would be doing is potentially using, yeah, okay, so this is a new degree of freedom. I agree with you. The programming ligatures mechanism would allow this to potentially render as a different character that is more slot-like, more box-like. That seems like an excellent idea. It also makes the possibility that Ampersand, with programming ligature world, that an Ampersand could render in some different way as well.
Right. I mean, honestly, I think that the thing that makes that feel messy is more the dangling ampersand than is the hash.
Possibly. In SMP,
there wasn't. And that's, of course, also what causes all the precedence issues, the dangling ampersand.
Well, so that raises the question, could there be another form of this, another way to write a pure function as a as a, let's say a prefix operator.
Well, prefix, I mean, would it be prefix or would it be around the thing? I mean, at which point it starts to lose its value pretty much.
Well, I mean, if it's either prefix or match fix, it's still, I mean, look, clearly, the story of this and this and so on, that's been a huge win. No question that that's been a good idea. And so this raises the question, could there be a prefix form of function? Oh, by the way, hash has basically been a good idea. And the, losing it in nested pronouns thing certainly happens to me a fair amount. As I write one function with hash, and then I want to put another function around it, and then I've either De Bruyne indexing myself, or which we can't do, or I'm actually giving names to these things. And in a perfect world, somehow there would be some automatic, code assistance thing that comes up and allows you to do the rename. You guys understand what I'm talking about. I'm saying if I say f of hash, and then I want to say ampersand, and then I want to say g of hash, comma, and then I want that hash to decide that it refers into, so if I did g of x here, I could put an f of that and x, and then let's see, where do I want to put this? I want to put this, now I'm even confused where I'm putting it. I'm putting it even there, and now I want to say x like that. And then I've reached inside the inner ampersand, which I could not do, right? I can only do that with a named function argument. That makes sense?
Yep.
And the only way to do that, if we would use hash, which I think is just utterly, flamingly obscure, is some kind of, numbered layers type thing, which is just crazy.
Right. I mean, the other thing is that if the ampersand, I don't think I really like the idea of having a prefix form of ampersand, but if the ampersand had been set up at the beginning to be a prefix form, then it would be compatible with the function arrow, because at least you wouldn't get into situations like this where you have one thing at the beginning and one thing at the end and you don't know which one is the inside and the outside. Right? I mean, one of them would have to come first.
I see, but I don't think that doesn't seem that. That
the
doesn't
ampersand form is equivalent to null function arrow body. So it's
in
like
terms of precedence.
I mean, well, I think they're the same pure function. Like if you write null in the first argument of a pure function, it's
I didn't know that.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean the question is
so it's like
I'm
the
talking
null
more
arrow
about
is almost like a prefix. It's not really a prefix operator.
I guess so. Although I would never write the null arrow, but sure.
What are you saying? I mean, what are you claiming?
So
do
if you
f
write
of
function.
So again, so if I do this,
parenthesize that and apply it to something.
I had no idea.
I've seen it, I think, with the writing it out with function. I don't think I'd ever seen it with the arrow.
Wow. Well, it certainly doesn't syntax color correctly.
The usefulness of this is so that you can use the 3-argument form of function, because you need something to put in the first argument.
You mean in the case where I say function null f of hash, comma, hold first or something?
Yeah.
This way you can still use slots and attributes.
Okay. You know what? This is not syntax coloring correctly, and that should be reported.
Yep.
I had absolutely no idea that null thing. I mean, the fact you have to parenthesize the arrowed form is, well, I guess it's not too bad, because otherwise it's completely obscure what's going on. I wonder whether there's an elided form of the arrow, a visually elided form of the arrow, that could be a prefix function.
About lambda.
That is the kind of standard thing.
But I wonder whether we could make something that kind of is like an idealized lambda.
Well, in Haskell, they use a backslash, I think, because it kind of looks like the top of a lambda.
That is such a horrifying idea.
I mean, different languages. I could look it up. I could try and look it up. I feel like I've seen several different languages done various sorts of things like that. Slash backslash or something. Stuff like that that kind of looks a little bit like a lambda.
Yeah, but we have cooked the backslash thing rather firmly as an escape. I believe.
Sure.
I believe. I'm not certain. I mean, maybe there's a I mean, we use backslash dot, backslash colon. We use a whole bunch of backslash type forms. But I mean, I wonder.
But honestly, I feel like if we just have another, I mean, it's one of these things where, like, for example, when someone is learning and people are already, a little bit confused about, oh, when should I write function, with the function name function, or when should I use an ampersand? And, you can explain, oh, well, it's just for convenience. But if we have then another thing that's just as convenient as ampersand, it's kind of like, by what process do you decide which one to use?
Yeah, I'm not sure that
map.
I have not had as much. I mean, like the @ sign and / you could have said exactly the same thing about that. But in fact, people learn them as slang, basically. They don't learn them initially. I mean, that would not be the correct thing to teach somebody the first time they see a function. You should teach it with them with square brackets. But as a slang, when you're typing things out, it's very convenient.
But then which is the slang of which? If you had both some lambda thing and you had the ampersand.
The lambda is the slang of the ampersand.
But why? I mean, that's just for historical reasons.
No, I don't think so, because the ampersand is more general.
Wait, I thought the lambda we were talking about is basically just a prefix form of the ampersand.
Well, maybe it is. Then
I think potentially lambda is both the ampersand and the arrow. Like for all, can have a subscript that's giving what variables you're quantifying over. So I could picture like a lambda subscript X for named variables.
Right. Well, so what would it look like though? If it was unnamed, it would look like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it was named, I mean, that would be
something useful of @ and / is that they have different precedents. So perhaps this could be used as a way of actually mixing the hashes. If the lambda, for example, has a lot more precedents than the ampersand.
Why would that help in mixing hashes? Because then this thing has bound and finished its hash sign binding. So you'd be able to write something like lambda f of hash plus hash ampersand.
Right.
But wouldn't that be much clearer to write with just multiple ampersands or multiple lambdas? Because then at least that way you can tell which one's on the inside and the outside.
I think we should have a think about whether there's a possibility of a prefix form. And I like this idea that you could subscript the variables. I think that's interesting. I think that there's, one thing that's changed in 30 years is that 35 years ago, lambda was a known thing in mathematical logic and was pretty much unknown outside of that. And we could argue that it has become more widely known, and we should consider using that language, that natural language evolution in effect to our advantage. So what we would do then is we would have a stylized lambda-like thing that might be some, more like a for all or there exists, which is a very a very kind of sort of linearly drawn, straight line drawn object. let's think about this some more. Okay, so we've got two action items. We've got a programming ligature around hash sign to make it more placeholder-like. And we've got the possibility of I think we would want some kind of ASCIified form of the lambda that would turn into some lambda object here. Thoughts from people? I mean, honestly, things like the mapping, the function arrow thing, that is really going to be mostly an expert thing because it involves knowing how you type it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What about the presence of lambdas? Because lambdas have a strange way of combining, if I remember correctly.
What do you mean a strange way of combining? You mean a lambda in what? In mathematical logic?
Yes. So there was this. Am I confused? Yes. So, sorry, I'm confused. I think it's when you have terms and you are not using hashes and things like that you have to be careful with orders of things.
Yeah, it's a huge mess.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact, old Alonzo Church, when he invented lambda, was completely unsure that it would work. And that's why he kind of tried to translate to combinators where he didn't have variables and things like this. And I mean, the fact is that, in a sense, hash sign is a bit like using combinators, except that it isn't like using combinators. It's only one level. I mean, combinators are the way that you can, everything is going to work out okay in the end, but they are utterly obscure, utterly non-human understandable. I mean, it'll be interesting to see as the years go by, whether, now that people more or less understand how lambdas work, will there come a time when people actually understand how combinators work? I'm skeptical. Okay, so look, coming back to our original question, should there be operator forms for additional functions? I think let's identify what the top two next functions might be and consider those, and let's more seriously consider this more general solution. Make sense, people?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Okay.
What is the case? I don't know this, but I should know it. I mean, after all these years, if I do this, I have never done this like this. So is it the case that I can now say, okay, so I take that and I say X. Oh, how nice.
And if you just evaluate it, even the output form will show it with an ampersand.
Okay, but the main point here is that if I say something like, color function, arrow, function, blah, 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 I don't have to deal with all this crazy. I mean,
yeah. Although technically it is fewer characters to do an ampersand in parentheses.
It is, but it's somehow more obscure. I never thought.
Me personally, when I'm using parentheses, I would rather rewrite the code to have brackets. So
right, which I do too.
Parentheses ampersand, I'd probably use function in this case for that reason.
Like I have the same instinct, but I don't know why, because it's kind of like, I mean, it's just as readable, I think, and it's just as, I mean, it might even be more readable because it's a different type of bracket, which makes it more clear where it ends. And but I agree that it looks kind of uglier in some way.
Right. Well, I think perhaps it's because all right, so we've got this and we've got this. I think part of the problem here is that there's just an awful lot of, just obscure punctuational characters involved.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the outer parens are like why do we need this? It's not obvious why I think that's one of the issues. Is it's not obvious why they're needed, because
I mean, outer parens always sort of feel like a failure of precedence.
Yes. But these outer parens, if I'm writing x plus 1 times x plus 2 or something, times 2 plus x, those parens don't bother me. You know what it is? It's parens that have no... Yes, it's okay. Okay, parens like this don't bother me. The problem here is that we're so used to seeing arrow without a parenthesized thing on the right-hand side that it just seems just weird that there are outer parens hanging out there.
Maybe another point is just that if you don't know what you're doing, you might forget the parens.
Well, yes.
Perhaps it's also parentheses that are outside mathematics. So they feel more natural in mathematics.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like when I write something like if you're writing something with nested maps, and usually the precedence is correct, but sometimes you need parentheses, and that also feels kind of ugly.
Well, I mean, okay, so the alternative here would be a that's going to be weird too. Well, we should try this. I had never even thought of this. This seems, yeah, I mean, of these forms, this is definitely obscure. And I wonder, given that we're doing all these programming ligature things, I wonder what would happen if in this form, there's nothing that tells us that visually those parens have to look the same as all other parens. I don't know whether it really helps, but that didn't even work.
I mean, historically, what was the reasoning behind the ampersand?
As a character?
Yeah. I mean, is it trying to look like a lambda or something?
No, I don't think so. It was an escape from the way this worked in SMP, which is what we're going back to. SMP defaulted to everything would be applied as a head. Let's see, how did this work? SMP had this mechanism where, let's see, SMP did not have the idea of composite heads in the same way that we have now. And it had to have this thing that it called a mark, which was just a disastrous object, which was a thing that said, when you apply this, do the equivalent of to ampersand, rather than, if you said f as the function to apply, it will happily wrap f around things. But it didn't have a good way to say, actually think of this as the pure to, not a to that will be wrapped around things. And so it had this notion of a mark to deal with that. And that was so horrifying. Well, let's actually look at what it did. Hold on 1 second. Let me just see, since we are returning to so many of the things that, let's see. Okay. Okay, there's the SMP precedence table. That was another interesting idea. Pre-simplification. That was a evaluate this. That was the equivalent of evaluate, but done in the parser. Which I think in modern times basically happens by people selecting something and typing command, return. I don't think that has a real place in modern times. Some of these were just frigging disastrous.
I like how set has a colon and equals is a single equal. That seems like kind of another bad idea.
It was a bad idea. As was, I mean, quite a few of these things, like that was outer. Oh yeah, that was interesting. That was the equivalent of percent X. But coming back down here to mark, let's see where mark shows up here. Oh, don't tell me that the only place it shows, oh no.
It might only be written with a back tick, which your OCR is not going to get.
Yes, I know. Oh, look at this. This is funny. This is because in those days, ASCII was not the only character encoding. Epsidic was also alive and well. Okay, hold on. Let me just find this. Let's see. Where would it be? I would imagine this would be in a section. There are some things here. Chameleonic expressions is another one of these super bizarre ideas. That was for dealing with, that was the equivalent of module variables, where you could have a single variable that every time it was mentioned would change its name. Where would this be? Maybe 2.7's templates thing. That might be where it is. Don't remember what a template is. Oh, come on. Why isn't this? Help. Oh, there's pre and post living already. Monitor escapes. I think we have finally discontinued these, and they're not for lizards either. Okay, 2.7.
Basically, it sounds like basically just the back tick was basically how you did the ampersand, and it was a prefix.
But the backtick was the inverse of an ampersand. That is, the backtick caused things to, let me just look. NP was the equivalent of sequence. Why is this not scrolling properly? It's crazy. Oh, for goodness sake, come on.
Isn't this like a several hundred page document that you're scrolling through?
Well, yes, but
or are you trying to find the page from Mark?
I'm trying to find the page from Mark. Templates. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Template is an expression specifying action to be taken on a set of expressions. Oh, gosh. Okay. The problem this had was, that's right, that was the issue. This did not distinguish between functions and pattern variables. So $x was both a, see, look at this. Look at this thing here. I don't even know what order it was taking them in. How did this possibly work? This is an apply. Okay.
It was like X, the equivalent of #1. $X.
I assume so, but I assume it was in canonical order, but that seems just completely crazy. The association of SI with DI is determined by sorting the DI into canonical order.
Oh, so you could use ABC if you wanted to, and it would just sort them. That's completely insane.
Well, this is a pronoun. This is a version of the pronoun problem. That is really weird. Here, okay, so there's one unfilled slot which gets left over. That's the equivalent of hash hash. Okay, let's just see how mark shows up. Okay, so mark. Okay, so the unification here is between pattern variables and slots, which appears to me to be simply a bad idea. Although, as we look at two-way rules, it's starting to rear its head again. Okay, so this was the thing that was not figured out in SMP, was the notion of composite heads, because that was what SMP did for a composite head. It basically didn't like it. Oh, and that was another incredibly bad idea. That was a list as a head being applied to a number is the equivalent of part.
Sorry to interrupt here. I'm going to have to step out for a minute.
Okay, we need to wrap fairly soon here, but okay, so most of what's here is just bad ideas. Right, so in this case, I had forgotten I had forgotten the unification of pattern variables and slots. Unfortunately, this multi-replace function needs to have something. I mean, and when we were talking about supplied, we were talking about something again where we have some need to unify patterns and slots. If I'm not mistaken, right? Because supplied has in it, hash index type variables, as well as having, as well as the possibility.
Well, so the most recent thing we discussed was having lots of new symbols that are like $$ index and $$ position.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Things
Which
like
is actually a good idea.
set those. And
yeah, that's a good idea.
Applied would just then be the non-lexically scanned form.
Right.
Like you list the
I'd forgotten
that. Symbols that you want.
All right. Well, there's probably nothing we can learn from this. This is, although it is amusing, this canonical ordering of pattern of slot names is amusing, if probably a bad idea. Okay. Well, let's see if we can dispatch one more thing here. So I think we've got a plan for how, at least what to explore here.
So these are two proposed new functions that are taking the tops of trees in two different ways. So ancestor tree takes a list of positions and treetop just takes a level. So the thing I'm wanting to discuss here is just approving these.
Did we approve both of these functions before?
No, we haven't.
Did we discuss the idea that there will be two different functions for this?
No, we haven't gotten. This is a follow-up on our previous discussion where we proposed having something like treetop.
Okay, and you believe there's a need to have also a thing called ancestor tree?
Yes, because so for treetop, you want to be able to just say like treetop, 2, and have the top 2 levels.
I see what you're saying. The treetop. So one thing that I want to make sure of is you are very big on labeled trees, but a lot of the uses that I've had are big trees without labels or without visible labels. But what you're saying is this is the ancestor tree. Why can't I say the ancestor tree of, oh, I see, there's no guarantee that the payload, I have to refer to it by position in the tree.
Yeah, so this is in the tree extract, tree insert, tree delete family. So one question is the name. Should it be ancestor tree or should it be tree something?
I understand. And Treetop, which is a bit of a whimsical name, just takes the tree down to a certain level.
Yep.
Well, I agree. These are both useful functions. Now, what is the downward-looking ancestor tree? If I want E and I want every piece of the tree hanging below E, what do I do?
That's tree extract.
I mean, what about tree above?
So the other ones are like tree and then some action, like tree extract, tree insert, tree delete.
Is tree extract actually the right name? If it was tree above and tree below, would that actually be better naming?
So tree extract works like extract does in that you can give it a single position and you get a single tree or a single expression, or you can give it a list and then you get a list of trees or a list of expressions.
Christopher, what were you saying?
The same thing. I mean, it's like extract.
Yeah. Okay, but though, what would be the analog of? I mean, this is sort of like what is the analog of this, of the being above?
This would be like if in delete you could say something like delete 2, all. Like you're trying to delete everything below certain positions.
What would it look like though? Because in a tree you can just quarterize the end by putting a null collection of subtrees. But in an expression, it's less obvious how you quarterize the end, other than by having, I guess, a function with no arguments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, it would be exactly that. Like if you had f of 1, 2, 3, and you just wanted level 0, you'd get just f open close.
Okay, the tree of ancestors of a list of subtrees. So what is that? That's some kind of spanning.
Yeah, so you keep the positions that you specify and their ancestors so that you get something that's connected ultimately to the root, and you exclude everything else. So that's everything on other branches and everything below those positions.
Everything on other branches. Hold on. So if you've got all 3 of these, this means everything you need to kind of rig to hang those pieces will be there.
Yep.
This is a suggestion from Michael in the live stream, tree take. Why is that right?
Tree take was one of your suggestions actually for Treetop. Like you could say tree take.
Well, I think that makes some sense.
And take it. The difference with take is that take specs are more flexible for one, and that's like taking a number of elements of a list, and this is like truncating the levels, or for ancestor trees, position specs.
See, it is a little bit odd that we can do this for a tree, but we can't do it for an expression, which is, after all, a tree. The treetop operation.
I think it's a sensible operation on expressions.
It's very similar to shallow.
Yes.
And essentially what one would do is to say, I mean, the question is, what do you quarterize with? Because you are quarterizing somehow. You've got dangling ends. You've got to fill something in for those.
No, I don't fill in anything for them. So
I know you don't in a tree, but in an expression, it's a little bit more weird because you end up with 0 argument functions and things.
Exactly. Well, so I guess the problem is that if you applied this operation to an expression, you'll get some other expression, and unless your thing is just a totally inert expression,
it could go bonkers.
Yeah.
But if you give it a quarterization cork, so to speak, then to put in those sort of dangling ends.
What you really need is to wrap the whole thing and like hold.
Maybe. I'm not sure how useful that is, but I mean, I think a pretty common thing is it is fairly inert. It's a bunch of lists, but you just want to see the top layers. And you can do that visually by using shallow, but there's no good way to do that. You know, really what this is the shallow equivalent of take. Take is for a structure that is a sequential array-like structure, and shallow is, at least visually, for a thing that has hierarchical structure. So the question is what? I think we're running out of time here. We got to pick this up next time.
Okay.
Yes, I mean these are basically just naming questions. I think at this point, I think we're agreeing on the functionality here. Fine. Okay. All right. See you guys soon.
Right.
And